So we are somewhat of a smorgasbord religion, right? We offer a little of this and a little of that. I have a colleague who says actually that what makes him feel best about our faith is that for him, we accept and affirm each other's differences, but also how we protect each other's differences. And man, we can be absolutely different in our beliefs, right? We could be atheist, agnostic, pagan, humanist, Christian, panentheist, Buddhist. Truth is, I do agree with my friend that what my friend values is precious in and of itself and is enough for him. I love my friend, but I'm not really sure that it's enough for the world or for me. So to tease this out a little bit, I want to tell you two stories. Let me first start out by giving you a little bit more about the first one, okay? It's an ancient one about Abraham, who is, of course, the father of faith for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Now, Karen Armstrong, the British writer on comparative religions, reminds us that it is difficult to discern what Abraham actually believes. This is not a guy with a dogma or a 10-point confession of faith that he has memorized in his head. Instead, when it comes to belief, he's regularly like kind of confused and asks more questions than gets satisfying answers for. But what he does have is one profound religious experience. So I want you to imagine this. Abraham is out on the desert with his tribe in tents, taking a nap. It's midday. Everybody, it's so hot that all anybody can do is rest, right? And Abraham's sitting outside of the tents and he's got a big feather fan and maybe a good glass of Chardonnay. No, he doesn't really, but okay, he's got a big feather fan probably to keep himself cool, right? And as he's keeping himself cool, he looks out on the horizon and he sees three strangers. Now, which is true in the ancient world is true for us, right? Oftentimes, the stranger proved more of a threat than an opportunity. But what does Abraham do when he sees those strangers on the horizon? He actually gets up and he brushes off his robes and he walks towards them and he says, Hola, ¿qué pasa? Well, not really. He probably says shalom or something like that, right? And he welcomes the stranger to him with his tribe. And he gets an elaborate meal put together. He offers up his best robes and they share stories, and Abraham offers comfort and solace to these strangers. And then it happens quite slyly, without oracle or fanfare, that one of those strangers is Abraham's God. And so it is through an act of practical compassion, Abraham has ushered in the holy. It is true, by serving needs greater than his own, the holy descends upon him. Okay, now the second story is about my friend Marcy and Brian, and I lived in New York City when they did, and they had this one occasion that happened to them once at dinner. So they go out to dinner to this Chinese restaurant, and in New York, you can often sit at a seat right on the sidewalk, and it had a big glass window that was between them sitting in the restaurant and outside on the sidewalk. And they're eating this big pile of lo mein noodles, and in walks this woman, and she takes a hold of both sides of their plate and says, "Oh, sorry." And she leaves with their plate of lo mein that they're eating. And she doesn't go to the kitchen. She walks outside of the restaurant and she stands right in front of them on the sidewalk and she's shoveling lo mein noodles into her mouth. Now, the proprietor of the restaurant realizes what's going on. He runs outside and he he like starts yelling at this woman in Chinese, and she's not doing anything besides keeps eating. Then finally he decides he wants his plate. So he grabs a hold of the plate and the two of them are going back and forth and back and forth. And the noodles are sliding to and fro, right? And then finally he yanks it out and the noodles fall down at her feet and he holds up the plate like it's a trophy in the air. And he comes back in the restaurant and he offers up to Marcy and Brian a new plate of lo mein noodles. Now, they had eaten most of those noodles already, so they didn't eat that much of them. And they were going to a movie, so they asked to have them, wrapped up for them. And they take those noodles with them to the movie theater as they're walking there. And as they come about a couple blocks away from that restaurant, they see the lo mein thief. And she is kind of yelling at people around her, and she's agitated and upset. And right away, Brian says to Marcy, can we just leave her alone, please? And Marcy says, no. She walks up to the woman, she takes her noodles in front of her, and she says, we haven't been formally introduced, but a little while ago, you were interested in our noodles. If you're still hungry, I'd love for you to have them. The woman looks at Marcy straight in the eyes, bows a little bit, and says, thank you. Now, Marcy told me that story as an atheist, but as she said, it was real and moving. She said something happened to her in that exchange. She did not use traditional theological language. Yet, like Abraham, she was clear that her act of practical compassion had led to a holy encounter. So, two stories, two very different ideologies, one of Abraham, the theist, one of Marcy, the atheist. As belief systems, they're incompatible, right? As experiences, though, they are virtually the same. And here's where we, as Unitarian Universalists, are in very familiar territory. Because from where I stand, this sums up kind of the dominant pattern of our theological debates in the last 20 and 30 years, especially as it's played out in our congregations. For years, we've begun discussions that posit two very different belief systems against each other, usually very much akin to that of Abraham and Marcy. And while today there are many more belief systems kind of in the mix within our congregations, the atheists versus theists for most of our recent history have been the two that get paired off against each other. But as we theists and atheists have pushed each other and fought each other and belittled each other and hung in with each other and then listened harder and listened more lovingly, actually, to each other, we've eventually gotten around to talking about the common experience that is connecting these different faith stances. We're, in a sense, coming around to what my Midwest friends might say. You say potato, I say potato, but basically we're talking about the exact same vegetable. And I think we are really grown up and are clear that the question of belief is not which belief is right and which belief is wrong, but does your belief actually lead you to the right experience, to the experience of practical compassion and connection? So I like to provocatively kind of say to our newcomers often, Unitarian Universalism doesn't really care what it is that you believe. We don't care if you're an atheist, agnostic, theist, Christian, Buddhist, pagan, Barnes and Nobleite. We care whether or not your atheism, theism, paganism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Barnes and Nobleism leads you to deeper and repaired connection, leads you to listen more acutely to your deepest voice, be open more widely to life's gifts, and to serve more passionately needs greater than your own. In other words, do your beliefs actually help you to connect to yourself and others and life? And if they do, they are in. And if they don't, they're out. And we really kind of mean that. That right there is what Kaaren Armstrong says over and over again in her writing, if you've ever read some of her stuff. She points out that all major religious traditions, in one way or another, fundamentally talk about one thing: compassion and connection. Or as she puts it, we are most fully ourselves when we give ourselves away. And the single test of every theology, of every spiritual practice she has ever studied, is, does it result in getting outside of your piggish self? Now, of course, she doesn't say it exactly like that, but that's kind of what she's getting at, right? She loves to tell that story about Rabbi Hillel. And it's a story actually that you probably may have heard before, but a pagan evidently at one point said to Rabbi Hillel that if you can say all of like the crux of Judaism while standing on one foot, that this pagan would convert to Judaism. So Rabbi Hillel stands on one foot as if exactly the same thing I am doing right now, which you can't see, but I am standing on one foot. And he said this: do not do unto others what you would not like done unto yourself. That is the Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Then he put his foot down. And I want you to notice something here, right? This is where we get to kind of the meat of the sermon today. Whenever Armstrong tells that story, if you've, again, read any of her work, she goes out of her way to stress that God wasn't mentioned, nor was Mount Sinai, the law of the Holy Land, or other values kind of inseparable from mainstream Judaism. She emphasizes that Hillel summed up the allegiance of Judaism as being devoted to that experience of compassion and connection. She often goes on and does that same analysis for other religious traditions. Now, when she does this, what I hear her doing is not just affirming the worth of many beliefs and many traditions, but boldly actually proclaiming that those diverse traditions and beliefs are accountable to a higher standard. She is declaring and calling every religion to a higher authority, the higher authority of the experience of compassion and connection. She's not talking, by the way, about finding common ground or diversity. She's kind of like drawing a line in the sand between good religion and bad religion, between religion that actually has the power to heal the world and religion that has the power to rip it apart. That's what I hear so clearly from her. And friends, here's the thing, actually, not so clearly from us. In other words, I see our journey of discovery over the last 20 years or so almost mirroring that journey of discovery that Kaaren Armstrong has been on. But she took that discovery and declared it to be religion's core purpose and reason for being, while we still haven't really got there quite yet. We took that experience of connection and compassion and used it to see how theists and atheists weren't really that far off, that they were on the same page, almost to heal our own internal divide, if you will. But then somehow we never went on to claim it as our common and core purpose. And I know that's going to sound like I'm chewing us out, which I don't really mean to do. All I mean to say, friends, is we actually did find our center. It just took us a really, really long time to articulate it as such. Now, at this point, you may be thinking that you're kind of a bit confused, and you could be asking, wait a minute. I don't understand, because in June, we as a denomination decided to move from principles as like an intellectual concept to values, which you hold as part of your living and loving, right, at the center, with 6 of them informing the one at the core of being liberating love. So why, after we just voted on liberating love as being at the center, why is this minister talking about healing spiritual disconnection at the center? Well, first, let me say, you would be correct. To be confused a little bit, so let me explain. We did indeed just vote, as I said, in June, to put those values at the center of our faith, in particular, liberating love. Which on one level, I really dig this. I just do. I think it's fabulous. And on another level, I have a minor concern or critique, and I'm not the only one that's brought this up. But here it is. And that is that love, though beautiful as a concept, is very broad. And thus at times can feel kind of vague or a little bit like water running through your fingers, right? And the truth is, love can mean 100 different things to 100 different people. And most concerning, I think, for me, is often love is thought of as a warm and fuzzy feeling for people. So that is why I'm talking about connection. Not because I am proposing we declare a mutiny and replace new values and focus with Kaaren Anderson's focus on connection. I'm not doing that. But because I think we have to have the concept of healing spiritual disconnection clearly in our sight in order to understand actually what Unitarian Universalist liberating love means. Or to put it another way, by talking today about healing spiritual disconnection, I actually am talking about liberating love. Not just warm and fuzzy feelings, but the kind of love we are referring to when the disconnection between us and the most deepest self of ours is healed. The kind of love we are referring to when our disconnection with each other is repaired and healed, and the kind of love we feel when the disconnection between the needs of the world and our actions and heart is healed. See, if this experience of spiritual connection and compassion is the best way to define the core purpose of our faith as a means to tease out actually what liberating love really means, if this is where we are at and captures what we are about, oh, friends, there is a world out there hungry, a hurting world hungry for what we have to offer. Friends, I think because if we are honest, there are so many things that disconnect us, that keep liberating love at bay. Materialism, classism, consumerism, a shallow, selfish, status-obsessed, indifferent, violent, economically unstable culture that needs us and our message front and center. But here's the rub. As I said, for a very long time now, we've put at the center of our faith protecting our right to freedom of belief, which has posited our religion and our churches actually as places of retreat, as literal sanctuaries to run away to find like-minded people. But if healing spiritual disconnection is at our center and not freedom of belief, then who we are as a religion and what we are called to do seems to radically change. Maybe rather than being an oasis of which people can retreat to, we are more like those RVs that are set up like ambulances that go out and set up camp in those places of the world that are hurting. Maybe what the world needs, what our nation needs, is for us to take this saving message of ours and our healing tools and go out and help bandage up a society and culture that has been ripped apart. Which in the end means, maybe this is more of an evangelical sermon, actually, which I don't mean to freak you out, but being evangelical just means sharing the good news. That's all it is. I'm asking us, I think we've got to think through whether or not this is really the time and place, which I'm arguing it is, for us to share our good news, not internally, but externally. Truth is, I don't know where this leads us really as congregations or even as individuals. I just know that this idea has captured my imagination and heart, and I'm hoping it's captured a little bit of yours. Because in the end, the more that we hole up in fear of being outed as heretics or non-theists or even not being liberal Christians, the more the community and the people in it forget their moral obligation and commitment to the greater we. And we, because we are holed up, forget it as well. The only things that save a deteriorating civil discourse, a declining commitment to democracy, and a fragile and waning collective obligation to the common good is to remind each other that we are more similar than dissimilar, that we are more connected than disconnected. We are all human. We are all in this together, no matter what someone's belief or faith or political leanings. Again, I don't really know where this leads us. I'm just hoping some of it has captured your imagination and heart like it has mine. Because this framing, I think, can help us figure out who we are now and where we want to go. I want to end with this little tiny poignant poem by Shel Silverstein. He once wrote this: "You have a magic carpet that will whiz you through the air to Spain or Maine or Africa, if you just tell it where. So will you let it take you where you've never been before, or will you buy some drapes to match and use it on your floor?" We have a magic carpet, my friends, capable of doing much, much more than matching drapes. May we be charged to let it take us where we've never been before. May it be so. Amen.